The Discovery. The cold wind howled over the frozen surface of the moon. Ice stretched for miles in every direction. Sharp mountains of blue crystal rose high into the sky. Snowflakes danced in the thin air, carried by a wind that never stopped. This place was lifeless. No one should have survived here. But the rescue ship had picked up a weak signal. It was small. Almost nothing. Still, it was a distress call. Someone had sent it. A small team landed near the source. Their boots sank into the deep snow. Their armored suits hissed as heaters turned on. The alien crew moved quickly. They were trained for emergency missions. Captain Velen, the team leader, gave the order. Scan for life, move fast, we don't have much time. The team found a crashed ship half buried in ice. It looked like a survey shuttle. One of the engines was missing. The other was blackened and broken. A long trail of crash marks showed how it had skidded across the ice before coming to rest against a glacier wall. The rescue crew forced the door open. It groaned and cracked under pressure. Inside, the light was dim and flickering. The power core was almost dead. Switch to helmets, Velen said. Atmosphere is thin. They entered slowly. The walls were covered in frost. Panels had been ripped open. Wires hung loose like frozen vines. It was quiet. Too quiet. Then they saw the bodies. There were two figures lying on the floor of the rear cabin. One was clearly alien, a female of Velen's own species. Her skin was pale, turning blue at the edges. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes closed. She looked almost dead. The other figure was wrapped around her from behind. A human. Taller, heavier, with one arm holding her close and his back pressed against the outer wall of the ship. His face was covered by a cracked helmet. His body didn't move. What happened here? Someone whispered. Captain Velen knelt beside them. He scanned the female. She's alive. Barely. Heartbeat is slow. Body temperature, critical. He touched her cheek. She's freezing to death. He turned to the human. The scan took longer. No response. For a moment, Velen thought he was dead. Then, a faint blip. He's alive too, Velen said. Just barely. They all stared. The human had taken off his own thermal pad. It was wrapped tightly around the alien female. His own suit was torn. In several places, his skin had frostbite. His lips were blue. But somehow, he had stayed alive. He gave her his heat, Velen said softly. He used his body to keep her warm. Nobody spoke for a while. Even in space, where strange things often happened, this was the unexpected. Another crew member moved closer. Do we know who they are? Velen checked the ID tags. Her name is Cirella. Commander, from the Allied Exploration Corps. He's from Earth. Lieutenant Mason, I think. Human fleet. There was silence again. I thought humans couldn't survive in this kind of cold, said one of the medics. They can't, Velen said. Not for long. He stood up. Get them both to medbay. Now. We may still have time. The crew worked quickly. They lifted the two bodies gently, placing them on emergency stretchers. Cirella stirred slightly. Her eyes opened for just a second. She looked up and tried to speak, but no sound came. Her hand reached out weakly toward the human beside her. Then she slipped back into sleep. As they carried her away, one of the crew members asked a quiet question. Why would he do that? Velen didn't answer right away. He watched as the medics rushed to prepare the stasis pods. The human's body was shaking from cold. His vitals were low. His sacrifice was written all over his face. He thought she would die, Velen finally said. So he decided to die with her, or keep her alive. Maybe he didn't think anyone would come, or maybe he didn't care. Another voice spoke, quiet and unsure. Would any of us have done the same? Velen didn't respond. He looked out the icy window toward the wrecked ship. Snow began to fall again, thick and slow, covering the crash site once more, hiding the wreck beneath another blanket of silence. But the story was not over. Flashback. First Contact Commander Cirella had never trusted humans. Not fully, not deeply. They were unpredictable creatures, loud, emotional, and strange. They laughed too easily, touched too often, and reacted with wild swings of anger or joy. Her people, the Sereti, valued control, logic, and quiet precision. Their minds were ordered like their starships, sleek, efficient, deliberate. So when she was assigned to a joint mission with a human officer, she expected irritation, maybe even conflict. What she did not expect was silence. Lieutenant Mason arrived late to the briefing, mud still on his boots, a coffee cup in hand, and the faintest smirk on his face like the galaxy wasn't nearly as serious as everyone thought it was. He said, nothing as Cirella outlined the survey goals. He only nodded and listened. While others asked questions or made side comments, Mason remained still, like he was observing more than he was contributing. Their first assignment together was simple: a geological scan on the outer rim of a developing colony world. Nothing dangerous. No combat, no diplomacy, just rocks and data. Cirella welcomed the simplicity. She had planned to do all the work herself, but Mason didn't get in the way. He didn't talk much. He didn't correct her or compete. He simply followed orders without complaint. Quiet, calm, professional. He moved like someone who had seen real war and didn't need to prove anything anymore. At first, she mistook his silence for laziness. Then she realized it was something else. Patience. One night, while they camped under the shadow of a crystal ridge, the cold winds howling outside the tent, she caught him staring up at the stars. He looked distant. Not sad. Not happy. Just far away. "Do you ever stop watching the sky?" she asked. He glanced at her, then looked back up. "Only when I'm under it." She didn't know what to make of that. Humans spoke in riddles sometimes. Later, she found him reading a small paper book. Actual paper, not digital. She had never seen a physical book outside a museum. "You carry that with you?" she asked. Mason nodded. "It was my sister's. She said it helps keep my feet on the ground." Cirella was quiet for a moment. "Strange. You fly through stars and bring a book made of trees." He chuckled softly. "We're a strange species." She didn't disagree. Over the next few days, the silence between them changed. It became more comfortable, less like a wall and more like a shared space. Mason never pried, never pushed her to speak. But when she did speak, he listened. Truly listened, like every word mattered. That was unusual. Even among her own people, she was used to being heard but not always understood. Once, during a mild equipment failure, she lost her temper, a rare thing for a Sereti. She cursed under her breath in her own language, frustrated by a faulty scanner. Mason didn't laugh. He didn't joke. He just passed her a backup unit and said, "Try this one, looks newer." Afterward, when she apologized for her unacceptable emotional response, Mason shook his head. "Anger means you care," he said. "Don't apologize for caring." No one had ever said that to her before. By the end of the mission's second week, Cirella had begun to see him differently. Not as a loud, reckless human, but as something else, something rarer. He was solid in the quiet moments, steady in the chaos. A quiet storm. She couldn't explain it, but she no longer felt so different when they sat beside each other in silence. And maybe that was the beginning of trust. She remembered one particular moment, small but strange. They were packing their gear beside the shuttle. The wind had picked up, blowing sand across the landing site. Mason looked up and said, "This planet breathes harder than Earth." She asked him what that meant. He smiled faintly. "Wind reminds me that a place is alive, that it's not ignoring us." That night, long after she should have been asleep, Cirella replayed that sentence in her mind. "Wind reminds me that a place is alive." She had thought humans only cared about technology, conquest, and comfort. But Mason, he saw things differently. He saw beauty where others saw danger. He found meaning in quiet places. And when he looked at her, not as a curiosity, not as a science experiment, but simply as someone beside him under the same sky. She felt something shift. Not love. Not yet, but something was waking up between them, and none of them, not Sorella, not Mason, not the crew waiting silently in the future, could have known that the cold, frozen moon would become the test of it all. The disaster, the storm came without warning. They had landed early that morning, the shuttle humming softly against the frozen plain. A routine scan mission, 3 days max. The moon was marked as uninhabited, low risk, with only minor geothermal activity beneath its icy surface. The danger rating was laughable. Even Sorella, with her relentless need for caution, had relaxed. The cold was biting, yes, but manageable. The environment was stable. The mission was clean, but the data had missed something, a magnetic surge, deep and sudden, burst from the moon's core like a sleeping monster waking from a 1,000-year slumber. The sensors gave no early warning. The comms went dead in seconds, and the sky, once a pale silver blue, darkened into a violent violet haze. Sorella had never heard that sound before. Metal shrieking, air pressure reversing, the shuttle screaming like it was alive and terrified. She had just stepped back inside the cockpit when the storm hit. The controls sparked, lights flickered. Mason shouted something behind her, but the static swallowed his words. Then everything lurched. The shuttle spun. Gravity vanished. Ice shattered. Outside the windows like glass. Sorella slammed into a wall, then into Mason's shoulder. He caught her, barely, and held on as the vessel skidded across the ice. No power, no guidance, just raw momentum and chaos. They came to a stop nearly half a kilometer from the original site, buried half sideways in a jagged ice trench. Steam hissed from the vents. Panels sparked, then died. All was still. Sorella coughed, tasted blood, and tried to move. Her arm wouldn't respond. Mason groaned beside her, one hand still gripped tightly around the seat rail. His face was bruised, his helmet cracked, but he was alive. The cold moved in fast. The shuttle's outer hull had been breached in 3 places. Life support was already failing. The internal heaters were damaged, and the power core, already old, had lost most of its charge during the crash. With no signal, no way to transmit a distress call, and no rescue expected for at least 72 hours, they both understood what this meant. They were stranded. Sorella's species had a weakness, one that rarely mattered in controlled environments. They could not endure extended cold. Their biology relied on internal heat regulation more sensitive than humans could imagine. After 1 hour below freezing, fatigue set in. After 2, cell function began to shut down. After 3, death. Mason didn't hesitate. He stripped the remaining heat blankets from the rear compartments and started sealing off sections of the shuttle to trap whatever warmth they had left. He worked fast, silent, focused. His hands bled where sharp edges cut through his gloves. When she tried to protest, he simply said, "You'll freeze first. Let me work." They set up a small shelter in the rear cabin, wrapping themselves in what little insulation remained. He rationed oxygen, rigged a small chemical heater, and forced her to drink warm fluid from a canister every 30 minutes. But it wasn't enough. Sorella's skin had already begun to pale into a frost-tinged blue. Her body trembled even under the blankets. Her voice slurred when she spoke. The signs were clear. She was dying. She didn't want to admit it, but she felt it. The slow slipping of thought, the weight in her limbs, her vision narrowing like a tunnel filled with snow. She looked at Mason, who sat across from her, face lined with worry, and knew that if she closed her eyes, she might not open them again. Then, without a word, he stood. He walked over and knelt beside her. He wrapped the emergency foil around both of them, pulled her close and lay down beside her, chest to her back, arms around her like a living shield. She tried to speak. "What are you doing?" "Keeping you alive," he said. "You'll freeze." He didn't answer. His body was warm. Not much, but enough. Enough to slow the cold from creeping further into her bones. His breath fogged the air near her face. She felt his heart beating, slow, steady, real. He was giving her everything he had left. Time passed, or maybe it didn't. Time became a strange, floating thing, neither here nor gone. She drifted in and out. Once she woke, feeling his hand still around hers, fingers stiff, lips cracked from the dry air. His eyes were closed. She whispered his name. No response. And still, he didn't move. She wanted to cry, but her tears had frozen. The last thing she remembered before everything went black was the sound of wind, cold, howling, endless, and the warmth of the human beside her, refusing to let her go. Present day, the recovery ship. There was a sterile hum in the air, faint, constant, like a machine trying to whisper through steel walls. Cirella awoke to white light and silence. Not the kind of silence that came with death, but the kind that came with machines. Clean, calculated, cold. She blinked slowly. Her vision was blurry, shapes swimming in front of her like ink in water. Everything smelled too clean, like filtered air and antiseptic. There were no shadows, no sky, no wind. She was alive. That realization hit first, not like a celebration, but like a quiet weight pressing against her chest. She shouldn't be. She remembered the cold, the absolute stillness, the ache in her bones. She remembered Mason. Her eyes darted weakly across the room. White walls, medical pods, soft lights embedded in the ceiling like artificial stars. A heartbeat. Monitor beeped slowly beside her. She was alone in the chamber. No, not alone. There were 2 stasis pods against the far wall. One was open, hers. The other was sealed. Panic rose faster than her body could move. Her limbs were slow, disconnected. She tried to sit up but collapsed back against the cushioning of the med bed, her breath catching. The machines beeped faster now. One of the monitors lit up in warning. A nurse drone glided toward her, mechanical arms shifting with precision, but she slapped it away with a weak, trembling hand. "Mason," she whispered. Her voice cracked like broken glass. "Where is he?" No answer. She tried again, louder. "The human. Lieutenant Mason. Where?" Her breath failed her again. The cold hadn't left her entirely. It still sat inside her lungs like frost refusing to melt. Doors opened. A tall figure entered the room. Captain Veln. He looked older than she remembered, more tired. Maybe it was just the lighting. He came to her side slowly, his boots making no sound on the smooth floor. "Cirella," he said gently. "You're safe now. You're on board the Valier. We picked up the signal 5 days ago." Her throat was too dry. "Is he?" Veln held up a hand. "He's alive. For now." Those words hit her like an electric pulse, hope and horror tangled together. She wanted to sit up, to move, to see him. But her body refused. "He gave up nearly all his heat," Veln continued, his voice quiet. "His suit was in pieces. He wrapped you in the last working thermal layer and pressed against the outer hull, shielding you from exposure. You were nearly frozen when we arrived. But him..." She didn't need him to finish, she could already see it. Mason, stiff and pale, his body trembling with cold-induced shock, frostbite on his hands. Blood turned thick and sluggish. Heart slowed to a crawl. "He's in the next room. Comatose," Veln added, eyes downcast. "We've done what we can. Human medicine has limits out here. We don't have the equipment to reverse what's happening to his nervous system. He might not wake up." Cirella closed her eyes and turned away. It should have been her. Her body wasn't built for ice. Her mind wasn't trained for warmth. And yet he had given her both. Without question, without condition. Her fingers curled, slowly into the blanket at her side. Her hand still felt the shape of his from days ago. "Why did he do it?" she asked, barely audible. Veln didn't speak at first. He watched the medical monitors blink in their endless patterns. Because that's what they do, he said finally. Humans. They choose to burn if it means someone else gets to live. Sorella didn't reply. Her eyes were open now, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in her life, she felt something she couldn't label, something no Soretti word could explain. It wasn't grief. It wasn't fear. It was deeper than that. Something raw and unfamiliar. She had known this human for only a matter of days, and still, he had laid down beside her in the ice knowing it might end him. Not because of orders, not because of logic, but because he had decided she was worth saving, and now he was dying in a room just meters away. The choice. The medbay's silence was a cruel echo of the choice waiting inside it. Sorella sat upright now, though her body still ached as if gravity itself had grown heavier. Wrapped in a thermal robe, her skin no longer blue with cold, she watched Mason through the transparent wall that separated his room from hers. He didn't move. His chest rose and fell, barely. His lips were pale. His hands, still bandaged, rested above the blanket like the hands of a statue, no longer instruments of warmth but of sacrifice. She had asked to see him. They had hesitated. The medical team had worried the emotional strain might slow her recovery. "You've only just stabilized," they had said. "Your blood pressure is still—" "Show me," she had interrupted. "Now." So they did, and now watching him lie there, she felt a helplessness that shamed her. It was not logical. It was not efficient. Her mind tried to calculate the loss, what a life was worth, what it meant to owe one. But numbers failed here. Equations had no weight in the face of what he had given. He had wrapped his death around her like a coat. The door slid open behind her. Footsteps? 2, not boots, soft-soled. She didn't turn. "You have a visitor," said one of the medical staff, his voice tight. Dr. Anuriel entered with a data pad pressed tightly to his chest. A veteran of both human and Soretti medicine, he was one of the few cross-species specialists in the fleet. He stood before her, paused, and then bowed his head slightly, an old Soretti gesture of respect. "I have news," he said, "but you may not like it." Sorella didn't speak, just nodded for him to continue. Anuriel inhaled. "Mason's neural functions are degrading, slowly but steadily. Hypothermic shock has caused clotting in the cerebral cortex. His body is alive, but his brain is losing signals. Even if we restart higher functions, he may not wake as himself." The words struck like a slow blade. "But," he continued, "there is a possibility." Sorella turned to look at him now. Her expression was blank, but her eyes sharp, waiting. "There's a theory," he said. "A serum based on Soretti regenerative plasma. Unstable, still experimental, never tested cross-species. But in theory, your biology could help reintroduce oxygen and circulation patterns into his brain. It could restore him." Sorella stared. "It's untested." "Yes." "Risks?" "To him, unknown. But to you?" He hesitated. "Draining your plasma during recovery could damage your immune system. You could suffer relapse, coma, organ collapse, or worse, rejection syndrome. If his body reacts to your cells violently." Sorella looked back at the window. There he was, still, quiet. He had risked no less. "What are the chances it works? Statistically?" Anuriel frowned. "Less than 20%. Emotionally?" He blinked. "Excuse me?" She turned her head to him. "What are the odds that I can live with doing nothing?" There was silence. Even the machine seemed to pause. "I will do it," she said. Anuriel opened his mouth. "Commander, you should—" She raised her hand. "Prepare the extraction." A moment passed. Then, the doctor gave a slow nod. "As you wish." She lay in the sterile white of the auxiliary chamber, her arm braced, a slow pump drawing the green-silver glow of her blood into containment tubes. It pulsed faintly, like liquid moonlight, alien. Even to her, she didn't look away. She watched it leave her body. She let herself feel every second of weakness, every dip in energy. She welcomed it. Because this, she realized, was more than just repayment. This was faith. Not in numbers, not in odds, but in a human who had believed her life was worth dying, for now, she had chosen to believe the same. If this was the cost of knowing what that meant, if this was what it meant to not just survive together, but to change because of one another, then she would pay it, even if she never woke again, even if he never did. Reawakening time did not return with a bang or a flash or a scream. It returned in quiet. Soft beeps, distant footsteps, the low murmur of recycled air pushing through ducts. Somewhere water trickled faintly in a pipe like rain on metal. Mason drifted toward it, not walking, not flying, just floating on the edge of it all, somewhere between memory and silence. At first there was no body to return to. No pain, no cold. Only the faintest weight of a thought. Don't let go. Then came the anchor, a single breath. His own, sudden, shallow, real. He gasped. His chest seized like it had forgotten how to move. 1,000 pins stabbed into his fingers, and toes' nerves screamed back to life. His heart staggered forward like a runner tripping on their first step. He tried to open his eyes. Light struck too hard. He groaned. "You're awake." The voice was soft, careful. Not surprise, certainty. A voice that had been waiting for him. Mason blinked against the blur. Slowly, shapes formed. A ceiling above. Him, curved and smooth. Medical panels, IV lines, oxygen ports. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry and raw like sandpaper. A shadow moved closer. Cirella. She was standing at his bedside, still pale but no longer fragile. She had traded her uniform for a soft gray robe with a Soretti medical crest on the shoulder. Her hair was pulled back tightly, but loose strands curled near her ears, details that made her look tired and very real. Mason stared, not sure if it was dream or memory. "You," he rasped. "Alive?" She raised an eyebrow. "You sound surprised." His eyes fluttered closed briefly. "Thought I lost you. Back on the ice." "You nearly did." She stepped closer. "But I was not the only one." A pause. Then she added, "You almost didn't make it." Mason swallowed. Hard. Still cold, she nodded. "You were dying." "No kidding," he said, coughing once weakly. There was a silence thick and intimate, filled with everything they could have said but didn't need to. She lowered herself into the chair beside him, hands resting quietly in her lap. The distance between them was measured not in meters but in memories. "You kept me alive," she said softly. He looked at her again. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes, they held something like awe, or fear, or something in between. "I just couldn't leave you there," he murmured. "No," she replied. "You couldn't." He tried to laugh, but it came out as a cracked breath. Not the most tactical decision. Not even close. She studied him. Really studied him. And for the first time, there was no barrier between them, no cultural protocol, no scientific curiosity, no subtle diplomacy. Just two lives that had refused to let go of each other. "I gave you part of myself," she said quietly. He looked puzzled. "Your brain was failing. The doctors had no options. I offered my plasma, my cells." Mason blinked slowly. "That's illegal, isn't it?" "Experimental," she corrected, "but necessary." He turned his head slightly, his voice dry. "That doesn't sound very Soretti of you." Something faint tugged at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile. Something deeper. Something only he had ever seen. "You were not being very human either," she said. He stared at the ceiling for a long moment, letting the words settle. "So, what now?" Cirella stood slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "Now," she said, "you recover, and then we talk." He gave a faint nod. Sounds fair. As she turned to leave, he called out, his voice barely a whisper. Cirella? She paused in the doorway, one hand resting lightly on the frame. I'd do it again, he said. She didn't reply immediately, but her hand curled once at her, sighed like a silent answer, a promise not yet spoken. And then she was gone, leaving behind only the echo of her footsteps and the quiet knowledge that something had changed between them. Not because of science, not because of duty, but because, when the cold came, he chose to burn. Epilogue. Humanity's mark, the hall was shaped like a crescent, open on one side to the stars. Cirella stood near the central platform of the Galactic Council chamber, facing beings from a dozen worlds. Some towered like trees with shimmering leaves for hair. Others hovered, featureless and pulsing with soft light. Her own people, the Sereti, sat in their high seats, draped in white and silver, faces masked in composure. And then, near the edge, seated with quiet restraint, were the humans. They hadn't been invited often. Their species was still new to the council, still young in the eyes of the old powers. Too loud, too emotional, too unpredictable. Today they listened. Cirella's voice was steady as she spoke, each word amplified across the chamber, translated in real time into over 100 languages. He should not have survived, she said. And I should not be standing here. Images floated above her, silent projections of a broken shuttle buried in ice, of medical reports, of a human man lying still beneath sterile light, of two lives caught in the thin breath between death and something beyond it. She let the silence stretch before she continued. There was no tactical reason to do what he did, no strategic value. He wasn't following protocol. There were no guarantees of rescue, no medals promised, no cameras watching. He gave me the last warmth in his body because he couldn't imagine not doing so. Some of the council shifted, uncomfortably. Others leaned forward, curious. My species would call it irrational, she said. My science team would call it unsound. My government would call it reckless. I call it something else. She raised her eyes. Human. A murmur moved through the chamber like a quiet ripple. The word landed differently this time, she went on. We speak often here of cooperation, of alliances, of shared goals, but we rarely speak of the kind of courage that does not expect reward, the kind of sacrifice that leaves no legacy, no echo. Unless someone chooses to remember it. She paused, her voice softened. I remember. Cirella stepped back from the podium. The light dimmed. For a long moment, the council said nothing. Then, slowly, the humans stood, not in protest, not in pride, but in acknowledgement. Mason was not there. He was still recovering in a protected medical facility, surrounded by a joint team of Sereti and human doctors. His body would heal in time, his mind more slowly, but he would live. And now, because of her, the story would live too. Weeks later, Cirella sat beside Mason beneath the soft artificial sky of the healing gardens aboard the Valyar. The trees weren't real, but they moved as if kissed by real wind. The grass shimmered underfoot like silver-threaded moss. A false sun hovered in a constant golden hour. Mason sipped a warm drink through trembling fingers. His voice had returned, though quieter now, more deliberate. Didn't think I'd end up famous, he muttered. You're not, she said flatly. I made sure they used no names. He raised an eyebrow. Protecting my reputation? Protecting mine. He smirked. Still not. Sereti behavior. No, she admitted. It's something else. He looked at her, really looked, and there was no awkwardness in the silence between them. Only the sense of two people who had already said everything that mattered in the way only survival allows. Do you regret it? He asked. Surviving? No. Giving part of yourself to save me. She considered this. No, she said. Because you already gave something I didn't understand. Now, I think I do. He nodded slowly. So what now? He asked. You go back to commanding fleets, I go back to ignoring paperwork and pretending to follow orders? Maybe, she said. Or maybe we start something else. His brow furrowed. Like what? She didn't answer, not with words. Instead, she reached across the distance between their chairs and placed her hand over his. Lightly, respectfully, but without hesitation. His fingers closed around hers, slow but sure. And in that moment, beneath a sky made of light and memory, no one had to speak to know that something new had begun, not just between them, but for what their story now meant. Because across the galaxy, others would hear it. And one day, when another soul was faced with the same cold choice, they might remember that when the alien was dying, the human laid down beside her and chose to burn.